Sarah Martinez, a 24-year-old waitress working at a luxury restaurant in Manhattan, struggles to support her sick mother and pay the mounting medical bills. On a busy night, she accidentally drops a tray of expensive dishes in front of a mysterious customer and is immediately fired by the cruel manager. But when the man stands up and reveals himself to be a powerful millionaire, he not only defends Sarah, but offers her an opportunity that will change her life forever. The story follows Sarah's journey from humiliation to the discovery of her true potential as she faces class prejudice, finds unexpected love, and learns that sometimes the most devastating moments can open the doors to the greatest miracles. The tray felt heavier than usual in my trembling hands as I navigated through the crowded dining room of Le Bernardin, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. The crystal glasses clinked softly against the fine china plates, each piece worth more than what I made in a week. My name is Sarah Martinez, and at 24, I'd been working as a waitress here for almost 2 years. 2 years of holding my breath every single shift, terrified of making the one mistake that would cost me everything. The restaurant buzzed with the quiet conversations of New York's elite. Men in $1,000 suits discussed business deals over wine that cost more than my monthly rent, while women draped in designer jewelry picked delicately at their food. I moved between the tables like a ghost, invisible to most of these people who saw me as nothing more than part of the scenery. My phone had been buzzing in my pocket all evening with texts from my mother's nurse. Mum's condition was getting worse, and the medical bills were piling up faster than I could pay them. The chemotherapy treatments were draining our savings, and I was already working double shifts just to keep up with the rent on our small apartment in Queens. "Table 12 is waiting for their appetizers," snapped Marcus, the head waiter, as he brushed past me with his usual disdainful look. Marcus had made it clear from my first day that he didn't think I belonged here. To him, I was just another poor girl from the wrong side of town, trying to play in a league far above her station. I had been carrying a tray of the restaurant's signature appetizers, delicate seafood towers that cost $200 each, when I noticed him. Table 7. A man sitting alone, probably in his early 40s, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of quiet confidence that spoke of real power. Unlike the other patrons who wore their wealth like armor, he seemed almost understated in his simple but perfectly tailored black suit. He was reading something on his phone, completely absorbed, when his eyes suddenly lifted and met mine across the crowded room. For a moment, time seemed to stop. There was something in his gaze, not the usual indifference I was accustomed to, but a genuine interest that caught me completely off guard. That's when it happened. My heel caught on the edge of the Persian rug that ran between the tables. I felt myself losing balance, my arms instinctively reaching out to steady myself, but it was too late. The tray tilted, and in what felt like slow motion, I watched as 6 pristine appetizers, 3 crystal wine glasses, and a bottle of vintage champagne worth more than I made in a month went crashing to the marble floor. The sound echoed through the restaurant like a gunshot. Every conversation stopped, every head turned. The delicate seafood towers exploded across the white marble, leaving a mess of caviar, lobster, and broken crystal that sparkled under the restaurant's elegant lighting. The champagne bottle had shattered, sending golden liquid spreading in every direction. I stood frozen in the middle of the destruction, my heart hammering so hard I could barely breathe. My uniform was splattered with champagne and bits of food, and I could feel the eyes of every single person in that room boring into me like lasers. "Martinez!" Mr. Fitzgerald, the restaurant manager, came storming across the dining room, his face red with fury. He was a thin, sharp-featured man who ruled the restaurant with an iron fist and zero tolerance for mistakes. Behind him trailed Marcus, who looked absolutely delighted at my misfortune. "Look what you've done," Fitzgerald's voice carried across the entire restaurant, ensuring that my humiliation was complete and public. "Do you have any idea how much this costs? This is exactly why I told the owner we shouldn't be hiring people like you." People like me. The words hit like a physical blow. I knew exactly what he meant. Poor people, Hispanic people, people who didn't belong in their perfect, pristine world. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Fitzgerald," I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. "It was an accident. An accident?" His laugh was cruel and sharp. "This is a $1,500 mistake, Martinez. $1,500. And that's just the food and champagne, not counting the disruption to our guests' evening." I could feel tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of all these people. I had too much pride left for that, even if it was all I had. "Please," I said, dropping to my knees and starting to gather the broken pieces with my bare hands. A shard of crystal cut my palm, and I watched as a drop of my blood fell onto the white marble floor. "Let me clean this up. I'll pay for the damages. I can work extra shifts. I can get up." Fitzgerald grabbed my arm and yanked me to my feet, causing me to drop the glass shards I'd been collecting. "You're done here, Martinez. Clean out your locker and get out. You're fired." The word hit me like a physical blow. Fired. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet as the reality of what this meant crashed over me. Without this job, I couldn't pay for Mum's treatments. I couldn't pay the rent. I couldn't pay for anything. "Please," I begged, not caring anymore who heard me. "Mr. Fitzgerald, please. My mother is sick. She needs her medication. I need this job. I'll do anything. Should have thought about that before you decided to play juggling act with our finest dinnerware," he said coldly. "Security will escort you out if necessary." That's when the man from table 7 stood up. He had been watching the entire scene unfold in silence, his expression unreadable. But now he rose from his chair with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to command, and suddenly the attention of the entire restaurant shifted from me to him. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but carrying an authority that made everyone in the room immediately pay attention. "But I think there's been a misunderstanding here." Fitzgerald's demeanor changed instantly. I could see him trying to place the man, the wheels turning as he realized this wasn't just any customer. "Sir, I apologize for the disturbance. We're handling this situation." "No," the man said simply, walking over to where I stood trembling among the wreckage. "You're not handling anything. You're destroying a young woman's life over an accident." He knelt down beside me and began picking up the larger pieces of broken crystal, his expensive suit apparently of no concern to him. "Are you hurt?" he asked me softly, noticing the cut on my palm. I shook my head, not trusting my voice to work. "What's your name?" he asked as he continued to help clean up the mess. "Sarah," I whispered. "Well, Sarah," he said, standing and facing Fitzgerald with a look that could have frozen fire. "I think you and I need to have a conversation with your manager about what just happened here." The tension in the room was palpable. Other diners were openly staring now, their meals forgotten as they watched this unexpected drama unfold. I could see Fitzgerald's confusion and growing concern as he tried to figure out who this man was and why he was defending a disgraced waitress. "Sir, with all due respect," Fitzgerald began, "this is an internal matter. This employee has cost us significant money and disrupted our other guests. We simply cannot—" "Cannot what?" the man interrupted, his voice still calm but with an edge of steel. "Cannot show basic human decency to someone who made an honest mistake?" He turned to address the entire restaurant, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I've been coming to fine establishments like this for more than 20 years, and I've seen plenty of accidents. What I've never seen is someone handle such a situation with less grace than this young woman has shown tonight." My cheeks burned with embarrassment, but there was something else too, a tiny spark of hope that maybe, somehow, this stranger's intervention might change everything. "Now," he continued, turning back to Fitzgerald, "I think we need to discuss this properly. But first, let's get this cleaned up and get Sarah some first aid for her hand." As if by magic, several busboys appeared to clean up the mess, while the man, whose name I still didn't know, gently took my wounded hand and examined the cut. "It's not deep," he said reassuringly, "but it should be cleaned and bandaged." I looked up into his eyes, searching for answers to a dozen questions. Who was this man? Why was he helping me? And most importantly, was there any chance that his intervention could actually save my job? But before I could ask any of these questions, I heard Fitzgerald's voice behind us, and the tone had changed completely. "Mr. Davidson." Fitzgerald's voice was suddenly small and uncertain. "Alexander Davidson?" The man, Mr. Davidson, didn't turn around immediately. Instead, he kept his focus on my injured hand as he spoke. "Yes, Richard, it's me." I felt Fitzgerald go rigid beside us. Even I, who knew nothing about the upper echelons of New York society, could sense that something significant had just shifted in the room. I had no idea you were dining with us tonight," Fitzgerald stammered. "If I had known..." "If you had known what?" Davidson asked, finally turning to face him. "You would have treated your staff with more respect. You would have shown some compassion for a young woman who's clearly going through a difficult time." The silence that followed was deafening. The name Alexander Davidson hung in the air like electricity before a storm. I watched as the color drained from Fitzgerald's face, and suddenly everything about his behavior made sense. Even Marcus, who had been hovering nearby with barely concealed glee at my downfall, took an involuntary step backward. I didn't know who Alexander Davidson was, but it was clear that everyone else in this room did. "Mr. Davidson," Fitzgerald began again, his voice now trembling slightly, "I assure you we run a very professional establishment here. This employee has been problematic for some time, and this incident was simply the final..." "Stop!" Davidson's voice cut through Fitzgerald's explanation like a blade. "Just stop talking, Richard. You're making this worse for yourself with every word." He turned to me, his expression softening. "Sarah, I want you to tell me exactly what happened tonight, from your perspective, and don't leave anything out." I glanced nervously at Fitzgerald, who was glaring at me with barely contained rage. Speaking honestly could make things even worse for me, but something in Davidson's eyes told me that this might be my only chance at the truth being heard. "I was carrying the appetizer tray to table 15, I began, my voice shaky but growing stronger with each word. "I've been working double shifts for the past month because my mother is undergoing chemotherapy, and I needed the extra money for her medical bills. I was tired, but I thought I was being careful." Davidson nodded encouragingly. "Go on." "I caught my heel on the rug. The same rug that Marcus told me last week was a tripping hazard that needed to be fixed. But when I mentioned it to Mr. Fitzgerald," he said. I hesitated, looking at Fitzgerald's increasingly pale face. "He said what?" Davidson pressed gently. "He said that if I couldn't handle working around a few bumps in the carpet, maybe I should find a job at McDonald's instead." I heard several gasps from nearby tables. Davidson's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "And tonight?" he asked. "Tonight, I lost my balance on that same spot. I tried to save the tray, but I couldn't. It was an accident. I swear it was just an accident." My voice broke slightly. "I offered to pay for the damages, to work extra shifts, anything to make it right. I can't lose this job, Mr. Davidson. My mother depends on me." The silence that followed was suffocating. I could feel the eyes of every diner, every staff member, every person in that restaurant fixed on our little group, standing among the remnants of my catastrophic mistake. Davidson looked around the restaurant slowly, taking in the faces of the other diners, the nervous staff members, and finally settling his gaze on Fitzgerald. "Richard," he said finally, "how long have you known who I am?" Well, sir, I recognized you as soon as Marcus pointed you out when you arrived. We're honored to have you dining with us tonight. And yet, you thought it was appropriate to conduct this public humiliation in front of me. You thought I would enjoy watching you destroy a young woman's livelihood over an accident?" Fitzgerald's face was now completely white. "Sir, I was simply following restaurant policy." "Whose policy?" Davidson's voice remained calm, but there was something underneath it that made my skin prickle. The owner's policy, sir." Davidson reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. "That's interesting, Richard, because I am the owner. The words hit the restaurant like a bomb. I felt my knees go weak. Around us, I could hear the sharp intake of breath from other staff members, the whispered conversations from nearby tables. Fitzgerald looked like he might faint. Alexander Davidson owned Le Bernardin. You're... Fitzgerald stammered. I'm the man who bought this restaurant 6 months ago through a holding company, Davidson said calmly. I'm the man who's been watching how it's run, how the staff is treated, how customers are served. I've been conducting what you might call an undercover evaluation of my investment. He looked around the room again, his gaze taking in every detail. And I have to say, Richard, I'm not impressed with what I've seen tonight. My mind was reeling. The quiet man who had defended me, who had knelt on the floor to help clean up my mess, owned one of the most prestigious restaurants in Manhattan. And I had just destroyed $1,500 worth of food and drinks in front of him. Sarah, Davidson said, turning back to me, I want you to go to the staff room and clean up that cut. Then I want you to wait for me there. Don't leave the building. I nodded mutely, not trusting my voice. Marcus, Davidson continued, please escort Sarah to the staff room and make sure she has everything she needs for first aid. Marcus, who looked almost as shocked as Fitzgerald, nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Of course, sir. As Marcus led me toward the back of the restaurant, I could hear Davidson's voice behind us, no longer calm, but carrying a note of steel that made me grateful I wasn't on the receiving end. Richard, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about your management style, your treatment of staff, and your understanding of what it means to run an establishment that bears my name. The staff room was a small, cramped space behind the kitchen where employees kept their lockers and took their breaks. Marcus fumbled with the first aid kit, his hands shaking as he helped me clean and bandage the cut on my palm. I can't believe it, he kept muttering. Alexander Davidson, the Alexander Davidson. Do you know who he is? I shook my head, still too stunned to speak properly. He's one of the biggest real estate developers in the city. Hotels, restaurants, apartment buildings. The man's worth hundreds of millions, maybe billions. Marcus sat down heavily on one of the plastic chairs, and Fitzgerald just humiliated one of his employees right in front of him. I didn't know, I whispered. When he helped me clean up, I thought he was just being kind. Marcus laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Kind? Sarah, men like Alexander Davidson don't do anything without a reason. The question is, what does he want with you? That thought sent a chill down my spine. In my brief experience with wealthy, powerful men, they rarely did anything purely out of kindness. There was always an agenda, always something they wanted in return. 20 minutes later, there was a soft knock on the staff room door. Davidson appeared, having removed his suit jacket and rolled up his sleeves. He looked tired, and there was a grimness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. How's your hand? He asked, sitting down across from me. It's fine, thank you. I held up the bandaged palm. Mr. Davidson, I want to apologize again for what happened. I know it was inexcusable, and if you want me to pay for the damages... Sarah, stop. He held up a hand. The damages are irrelevant. What concerns me is how you were treated afterward. He leaned forward slightly. I want you to tell me about your mother. The question caught me off guard. My mother? You mentioned chemotherapy. How long has she been sick? I hesitated. Talking about Mom's illness with a stranger, even one who had just defended me, felt like exposing a wound. But something in his eyes told me he was genuinely asking. Stage 3 breast cancer, I said quietly. Diagnosed 8 months ago. The treatments are expensive, even with insurance. I've been working every shift I can get to help pay for her care. Davidson nodded slowly. And your father? He left when I was 12. It's just been Mum and me ever since. What did you study in school? I looked up, surprised by the question. I went to community college for 2 years, business administration, but I had to drop out when Mom got sick. The medical bills, the time I needed to spend with her, I couldn't do both. And what did you want to do? Before your mother got sick, what was your plan? No one had asked me that question in so long that I almost didn't know how to answer it. I wanted to open my own restaurant someday, Something small and welcoming, where people could come for good food and feel like they belonged. I know it sounds silly, coming from someone who just destroyed a tray of your food. It doesn't sound silly at all, Davidson interrupted. It sounds like you have a dream and the drive to work for it. There was a longer silence, and I could hear the sounds of the restaurant continuing beyond the staff room door. Life going on, customers eating, staff serving, as if my entire world hadn't just been turned upside down. Sarah, Davidson said finally, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Are you willing to work hard? Not just the kind of hard work you've been doing here, but really push yourself to learn and grow. I didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. I'll do whatever it takes. He studied my face for a long moment, as if he was trying to see into my soul. Good, he said finally, because I'm about to make you an offer that's going to change your life. If this story is touching your heart so far, tell me from which place in the world you're following Sarah's journey. The words hung between us, full of promise and possibility. I held my breath, afraid that if I moved or spoke, this moment would shatter like the crystal on the restaurant floor. I'm listening, I whispered. Davidson smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen from him all evening. I'm going to give you a choice, Sarah. You can take a severance package, enough money to cover several months of your mother's treatments and living expenses while you find another job. Or, he paused, letting the words settle between us. Or you can come work for me directly, not as a waitress, but as my personal assistant. You'll learn every aspect of the restaurant business from the ground up. It will be demanding, challenging, and sometimes frustrating. But if you're serious about opening your own restaurant someday, I can teach you everything you need to know. My heart stopped. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen to people like me. I don't understand, I said slowly. Why would you do this for me? Davidson leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming thoughtful. Do you know what I saw tonight, Sarah? I saw someone who was willing to get on her hands and knees and pick up broken glass with her bare hands to try to make things right. I saw someone who was more concerned about paying for damages than defending herself against unfair treatment. I saw someone with pride, dignity, and a work ethic that's becoming increasingly rare. He stood up, extending his hand to me. I saw potential. I stared at his outstretched hand, my mind racing. This was impossible. This was the kind of thing that happened in movies, not to waitresses from Queens, whose biggest worry an hour ago was how to pay next month's rent. There's just one condition, Davidson added, and my heart sank. Here it comes, I thought. The catch, the thing that would make this offer too good to be true. What condition? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. His smile widened. You have to say yes. I stared at Alexander Davidson's outstretched hand for what felt like an eternity, my mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts and fears. The fluorescent light in the staff room buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made this surreal moment feel even more like a dream I might wake up from at any second. You're serious, I whispered, my voice barely audible above the distant sounds of the restaurant still operating beyond these walls. I don't make jokes about business, Sarah. His hand remained steady, waiting for mine. But I understand if you need time to think about it. This is a big decision. Time to think. The luxury of time was something I hadn't had in months. Every decision I'd made lately had been about immediate survival, which bills to pay first, how many shifts I could work without collapsing, whether to buy mom's medication or groceries for the week. The idea of making a choice about my future rather than just scrambling to get through today felt foreign and terrifying. What exactly would I be doing? I asked, still not taking his hand. I don't know anything about being a personal assistant. I've never worked in an office. I don't have a college degree. Sarah, Davidson's voice was gentle but firm. You're doing it again. Doing what? Telling me why you can't do something instead of asking me how you can learn to do it. The observation hit me like a physical blow because I realized he was right. When had I become someone who looked for reasons to fail instead of ways to succeed? When had I started believing that I wasn't good enough for opportunities like this? I thought about my mother, lying in that hospital bed 3 days ago when I visited during my lunch break. She had grabbed my hand with what little strength the chemo had left her and said, "Mija, I didn't sacrifice everything to give you a better life, just so you could settle for barely getting by. When opportunities come, you take them. You hear me?" And maybe this was one of those moments she had been talking about. If I said yes, I began slowly. When would I start? Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. My office is in the Davidson building on 5th Avenue. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. The 42nd floor. I took the card with trembling fingers. Alexander Davidson, CEO, Davidson Holdings. The address was in the heart of Manhattan, in a world I'd only ever seen from the outside. "What about Fitzgerald?" I asked. "What about tonight?" Davidson's expression hardened slightly. "Richard Fitzgerald no longer works for me as of 20 minutes ago. Marcus has been promoted to interim manager until I can find a permanent replacement. Someone who understands that treating staff with dignity isn't optional." My jaw dropped. Fitzgerald had been fired. The man who had humiliated me, who had called me "people like you" with such venom, was gone. The justice of it was almost too much to process. "As for tonight," Davidson continued, "tonight becomes a learning experience. Your first lesson in management. Sometimes the most important decisions happen during the crisis moments, not in the boardroom." He stood up and moved to the small mirror hanging on the staff room wall, straightening his tie with practiced efficiency. "I need to go address the restaurant staff and reassure our customers that everything is under control. But first, I need your answer, Sarah. Yes or no?" The weight of the decision felt enormous. Saying yes meant stepping into a world I knew nothing about, working for a man I'd met an hour ago, taking a risk that could either transform my life or end in spectacular failure. Saying no meant safety, familiarity, and the slow suffocation of all my dreams. I thought about my mother's words again. I thought about the small apartment in Queens, where we'd been barely scraping by. I thought about the business administration classes I'd had to abandon, the restaurant I'd dreamed of opening, the life I'd put on hold because surviving had taken all my energy. "Yes," I said, the word coming out stronger than I felt. "Yes, Mr. Davidson, I accept." He smiled and shook my hand firmly. "Alexander, if you're going to be working directly with me, we can drop the formalities. And Sarah, this is going to be harder than anything you've ever done. Are you ready for that?" "I'm ready," I said, and for the first time in months, I actually meant it. "Good. Now, I have one more surprise for you." Alexander moved toward the door, then paused. "I've already spoken with Dr. Rodriguez at Mount Sinai about your mother's treatments." My blood went cold. "How do you... What?" "I made a few phone calls while you were cleaning up. Your mother's medical bills are now covered through the company's extended healthcare program. She'll receive the best possible care without you having to worry about the cost." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process what he'd just said. "I don't understand. I never told you where she was being treated. I never told you her doctor's name." "Sarah, when you own as many businesses as I do, you learn to gather information quickly. Your employment records had your emergency contacts, and Dr. Rodriguez was very helpful once I explained the situation." A terrible thought crept into my mind. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that one of my employees had been dealing with a family medical emergency and that I wanted to ensure she could focus on her work without financial stress." Alexander's expression became serious. "I didn't mention anything about tonight, if that's what you're worried about. As far as anyone knows, this is a standard company benefit." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by suspicion. "Why would you do this? You don't even know me. For all you know, I could be a terrible employee. I could steal from you or quit after a week, or you could be exactly what I think you are," he interrupted. "Someone with untapped potential who just needs a real chance to prove it." There was something in his eyes that made me believe he was telling the truth, but it also frightened me. The intensity of his faith in me felt like a weight I wasn't sure I could carry. "Alexander," I said, testing out his first name, "what if I disappoint you?" What if I'm not as capable as you think I am? Then we'll figure it out together, he said simply. But Sarah, I've been in business for 25 years. I've learned to read people pretty accurately, and everything I've seen from you tonight tells me that you're going to exceed even your own expectations. A knock on the staff room door interrupted us. Marcus peeked his head in, looking nervous and excited at the same time. Mr. Davidson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the staff has some questions about the transition, and there are a few customers asking about what happened earlier. Of course. Alexander turned back to me. Sarah, go home. Get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be a very long day. He handed me another card. That has my direct number on it. If you have any questions tonight, any concerns, any second thoughts, call me, understood? I nodded, still feeling like I was floating outside my own body. What should I wear tomorrow? Something professional but comfortable. You're going to be learning by doing, which means you'll be moving around a lot. He smiled. And Sarah? Welcome to Davidson Holdings. As Alexander left with Marcus, I sat alone in the staff room for several minutes, trying to process everything that had just happened. 2 hours ago, I had been a struggling waitress with a sick mother and no prospects. Now I had a new job. My mother's medical bills were covered, and I was about to embark on a journey that could either fulfill all my dreams or destroy them completely. I gathered my things from my locker, a spare uniform, some personal items, a photo of Mom and me from before she got sick. Everything I'd accumulated in 2 years of working at Le Bernardin fit into a small canvas bag. It seemed like such a small collection of belongings to represent such a significant chapter of my life. As I prepared to leave, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. My uniform was still stained with champagne and food. My hair had come loose from its ponytail during the chaos, and there were dark circles under my eyes from too many sleepless nights. I looked tired, frightened, and completely out of my depth. But there was something else in my reflection too, something I hadn't seen in a long time. There was hope. What comes next in this story will test everything Sarah believes about herself, and I promise you won't want to miss how she handles her first day in a world she never imagined she could enter. I walked through the restaurant one last time, past the tables where wealthy diners continued their conversations as if nothing had happened, past the spot where I'd fallen and where my old life had ended and my new one had begun. Some of the staff members looked up as I passed, their expressions ranging from curiosity to envy to genuine concern. At the front door, I paused and looked back. The restaurant looked the same as it had when I'd arrived for my shift 6 hours ago, but everything had changed. The Persian rug that had been my downfall was still there, waiting to trip the next careless employee. The crystal glasses still caught the light, beautiful and fragile. The wealthy customers still sat at their tables, oblivious to the drama that had played out around them. But I was no longer the same person who had walked through those doors earlier tonight. The cool October air hit my face as I stepped onto the Manhattan sidewalk, and I pulled out my phone to call my mother. She would be asleep by now, exhausted from her latest round of treatments, but I couldn't wait until morning to share this news. As her phone rang, I looked up at the glittering lights of the city stretching endlessly above me. Somewhere up there, on the 42nd floor of a building I'd probably walked past 100 times without really seeing, was my future waiting for me. Mija, Mom's sleepy voice answered the phone. Is everything okay? You sound different. I smiled, feeling tears I'd been holding back all evening finally start to fall, but for the first time in months, they were happy tears. Mom, I said, watching the traffic flow past me like a river of possibilities, everything is about to change. The Davidson building towered 42 stories above Fifth Avenue, like a glass and steel monument to success. I stood on the sidewalk at 7:45 a.m., clutching my small purse and staring up at the gleaming facade that reflected the morning sun in 1,000 brilliant fragments. The building's lobby was visible through floor-to-ceiling windows, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers, filled with men and women in expensive suits moving with the confident purpose of people who belonged in places like this. I had barely slept the night before. After calling my mother and sharing the incredible news, I had spent hours lying awake, alternating between excitement and terror. What if I couldn't do this job? What if Alexander realized he'd made a mistake? What if I embarrassed myself so badly that I ended up worse off than before? But standing here now, watching the steady stream of successful-looking people flowing in and out of the building, I remembered something my mother had taught me when I was little. Mia, courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing what you need to do anyway. I straightened my shoulders, smoothed down the simple black dress I'd bought at Target with my last $20, and walked through the revolving door into my new life. The lobby was even more intimidating up close. My footsteps echoed on the polished marble as I approached the security desk, where a uniformed guard looked up from his morning newspaper. "I'm here to see Alexander Davidson," I said, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "I'm Sarah Martinez, his new assistant." The guard consulted his computer screen, then smiled warmly. "Good morning, Miss Martinez. Mr. Davidson left instructions for you. Take the express elevator to the 42nd floor. Mrs. Chen will meet you there." The elevator ride seemed to last forever. As we climbed higher and higher above the city, I watched the numbers light up, 15, 20, 25, 30. With each floor, I felt like I was rising into a world I'd never imagined being part of. By the time the doors opened on 42, my palms were sweating and my heart was racing. The executive floor was nothing like I had expected. Instead of the sterile corporate environment I'd pictured, it was warm and elegant, with rich wood paneling, original artwork, and large windows that offered breathtaking views of Central Park. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and perfectly styled silver hair was waiting for me. "You must be Sarah," she said, extending her hand with a genuine smile. "I'm Linda Chen, Alexander's executive assistant. I've been with the company for 12 years, and I'll be showing you the ropes." "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Chen," I said, shaking her hand gratefully. "I have to admit, I'm a little nervous." "Please call me Linda, and nervous is perfectly normal." I remember my first day working for a company like this. I thought I was going to throw up in the elevator. She laughed, a warm sound that immediately put me at ease. "Alexander is in a meeting with the Tokyo office, but he wanted me to get you settled and start your orientation." Linda led me through a maze of offices and conference rooms, each one more impressive than the last. She showed me the break room. "The coffee here is infinitely better than restaurant coffee," she said with a wink. "The supply closet. Don't be shy about asking for anything you need." And finally, to a desk positioned just outside Alexander's corner office. "This is yours," Linda said, gesturing to a beautiful mahogany desk with a state-of-the-art computer and phone system. "Alexander specifically requested that your workspace be here so you could learn by observing how he handles daily operations." I ran my fingers over the smooth wood surface, still hardly believing this was real. "Linda, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did he hire me? I mean, I know what happened last night, but surely there are hundreds of qualified people who would want this job. People with experience, education, credentials." Linda sat down in the chair across from my new desk, her expression becoming thoughtful. "Sarah, in the 12 years I've worked for Alexander Davidson, I've seen him make a lot of hiring decisions. He's hired people with MBAs from Harvard, people with decades of experience, people who looked perfect on paper. And do you know what he's learned?" I shook my head. "Credentials don't predict character. Experience doesn't guarantee integrity. And education doesn't teach you how to care about doing the right thing." Linda leaned forward slightly. "What Alexander saw in you last night wasn't just someone who made a mistake. He saw someone who took responsibility for that mistake, who was willing to sacrifice for others, and who had the dignity to maintain her composure under pressure." Before I could respond, I heard the sound of Alexander's voice coming from his office, apparently finishing up his conference call. A few minutes later, his door opened and he emerged, looking impeccably professional in a navy suit and silver tie. "Sarah, good morning. I see Linda's been taking care of you." His smile was warm and genuine, the same one that had given me hope in the staff room last night. "Are you ready to jump in?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Excellent. Linda, would you mind walking Sarah through the morning routine while I finish up a few things? Then I'd like her to sit in on the 10 o'clock meeting with the restaurant acquisition team." My stomach dropped. Sit in on a meeting? "Alexander, I don't know anything about acquisitions which is exactly why you need to be there," he interrupted gently. "Sarah, you're not going to learn this business by reading manuals or taking courses. You're going to learn it by being thrown into the deep end and figuring out how to swim." For the next hour, Linda walked me through Alexander's daily schedule, showing me how to manage his calendar, screen his calls, and coordinate his meetings. It was overwhelming at first. There were so many moving parts, so many people who needed his attention, so many decisions that seemed to flow through his office every hour. "The key," Linda explained as she showed me the complex scheduling system, "is to understand that Alexander's time is literally worth millions of dollars. Every minute he spends in an unproductive meeting, every phone call that could have been an email, every interruption that breaks his focus, it all adds up to real financial impact." At 9:55, Alexander emerged from his office carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the focused expression of someone about to conduct serious business. "Sarah, are you ready for your first real lesson in how this company operates?" The conference room was filled with 6 people in expensive suits, all of whom turned to look at me with varying degrees of curiosity when Alexander introduced me as his new assistant. I took a seat in the corner, trying to make myself invisible while simultaneously paying attention to everything being discussed. The meeting was about acquiring a small chain of family restaurants in Brooklyn, places that reminded me painfully of the neighborhood where I'd grown up. As I listened to the team discuss market analysis, profit margins, and restructuring plans, I began to understand that they were talking about people's lives, family businesses that had been built over generations. "The third location is the most problematic," said a woman with short blonde hair and thick-rimmed glasses. "The owner is 73 years old, running the place with his son and daughter-in-law. Their profit margins are terrible, their equipment is outdated, and frankly, they're resistant to the changes we'd need to make to bring them up to our standards." "What kind of changes?" Alexander asked. "Complete kitchen renovation, new menu, updated decor, staff training. Basically, we'd be starting from scratch. It might be easier to just close that location and focus on the other 2. I felt a surge of emotion that caught me completely off guard. These people were talking about destroying someone's livelihood, someone's family legacy, as casually as they might discuss changing the wallpaper. Before I could stop myself, I cleared my throat. Everyone turned to look at me, and I realized with horror that I was about to speak up in a room full of executives when I'd been specifically told to observe. But the words were already coming out of my mouth. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but could I ask a question about the third location?" Alexander's eyebrows raised slightly, but he nodded. "Go ahead, Sarah. You said the owner is 73 and running it with his family. Have you considered that maybe the restaurant isn't failing because of the equipment or the menu, but because it's serving a community that values authenticity over profit margins?" The room was completely silent. I could feel 6 pairs of eyes staring at me, and I wanted to sink through the floor. But I'd started this, so I had to finish it. "What I mean is," I continued, "maybe instead of starting from scratch, you could find a way to honor what they've already built while making the improvements they need. Keep the family involved, preserve what makes the place special to the community, but give them the resources to succeed." The blonde woman looked like she wanted to laugh. "That's a very idealistic perspective, but business doesn't work that way. Sentiment doesn't pay the bills." Neither does alienating your customer base, I said quietly, and immediately regretted it. But Alexander was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Sarah, tell me more about what you're thinking. My heart was pounding, but something inside me pushed forward. When I was growing up in Queens, there was this little restaurant my mom and I went to every Sunday after church. It wasn't fancy, the equipment was old, and I'm sure the profit margins were terrible. But it was ours, you know? It was where the neighborhood went to celebrate birthdays and anniversaries and first dates. When it closed because some developer bought the building, it wasn't just a restaurant that died. It was a piece of our community. If you're feeling connected to this moment in Sarah's story, I'd love to hear from which corner of the world you're experiencing this journey with us. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Finally, Alexander turned to the acquisition team. I want you to schedule a meeting with the family at the third location. Sarah will be coming with me to that meeting. He looked directly at me. I want to see if your perspective might open some doors that pure business analysis might miss. As the meeting concluded and the team filed out, I remained seated, staring at my hands and wondering if I'd just made the biggest mistake of my very short corporate career. Sarah, Alexander said after the room had cleared. Look at me. I raised my eyes to meet his, expecting to see disappointment or irritation. Instead, I saw something that looked like pride. That was either very brave or very foolish, he said. Fortunately, in business, those two things are often the same. You just taught me something important about how you see the world, and more importantly, you reminded me why I hired you in the first place. 3 days later, I found myself in the passenger seat of Alexander's black Mercedes, driving through the streets of Brooklyn toward a neighborhood that looked remarkably similar to the one where I'd grown up. The autumn leaves were beginning to turn, painting the tree-lined streets in shades of gold and amber that reminded me of Sunday mornings walking to church with my mother when times were simpler. Nervous? Alexander asked, glancing over at me as we stopped at a red light. Terrified, I admitted, adjusting the folder in my lap that contained all the research I'd done on Nonna's Kitchen, the third restaurant in the acquisition deal. What if I was wrong? What if my suggestion in the meeting was just naive idealism, and now I'm about to embarrass both of us? Alexander smiled, that same warm expression that had become familiar over the past few days. Sarah, do you know why I built my first restaurant? I shook my head. In all the conversations we'd had, he'd never mentioned his personal history with the industry. I was 26 years old, fresh out of business school, and I thought I knew everything about running a profitable enterprise. I bought a failing diner in Queens, not unlike the neighborhood where you grew up, actually, and I was going to transform it into something sleek and modern and financially successful. The light turned green, and we continued down the street lined with small shops and family-owned businesses. What happened? I gutted the place. New menu, new decor, new staff, new everything. I turned it into exactly what I thought a successful restaurant should look like. His voice took on a rueful tone, and within 6 months, it was completely empty. Turns out, I had destroyed everything that made the place special to the community it served. We pulled up in front of a small restaurant with a hand-painted sign that read Nonna's Kitchen in cheerful red letters. Through the large front windows, I could see checkered tablecloths, walls covered with family photos, and an elderly man with silver hair arranging fresh flowers in mason jars. I learned something important from that failure, Alexander continued, turning off the engine. Sometimes the most valuable thing about a business isn't what you can measure on a spreadsheet. Sometimes it's the intangible things, the history, the relationships, the role it plays in people's lives. As we walked toward the restaurant's entrance, I could smell the rich aromas of garlic, tomatoes, and fresh bread wafting from the kitchen. A bell chimed cheerfully as we opened the door, and the elderly man I'd seen through the window looked up with a smile that immediately reminded me of my grandfather. "You must be Mr. Davidson," he said, wiping his hands on his apron and extending one toward Alexander. "I'm Tony Rossini. Welcome to my place." Thank you for meeting with us, Mr. Rossini. This is Sarah Martinez, my assistant. Tony's handshake was firm and warm, and when he smiled at me, I saw the same pride in his eyes that I'd seen in my mother's when she talked about the small restaurant she'd dreamed of opening before life got in the way. Please, sit anywhere you like. Maria, that's my daughter-in-law. She's making us some lunch. You came on a good day. She's testing a new recipe for her grandmother's braciole. As we settled into a booth near the window, I looked around the restaurant with fresh eyes. Yes, the equipment was outdated and the decor wasn't trendy, but there was something indefinably special about this place. The walls were covered with photographs spanning decades. Wedding pictures, graduation photos, birthday celebrations. This wasn't just a restaurant. It was a repository of memories, a place where generations of families had marked the important moments of their lives. Mr. Rossini, Alexander began, I want to be completely transparent with you about why we're here. My company is interested in acquiring your restaurant as part of a small chain. But before we go any further, I want to understand what this place means to you and your family. Tony's expression became more serious. Mr. Davidson, my father opened this restaurant in 1952 when he came here from Sicily. He had nothing but a recipe book from my grandmother and a dream of feeding people the way family should be fed. For 70 years, 3 generations of Rossinis have worked in this kitchen. A woman in her 40s emerged from the kitchen carrying plates of food that smelled incredible. She had Tony's warm smile and the confident movements of someone completely at home in her environment. This is my daughter-in-law, Maria, Tony said proudly. She's the real chef now. I just try to stay out of her way. Maria laughed as she set down plates of braciole that looked like works of art. Don't let him fool you. He still insists on making the sauce every morning at 5 a.m. Says no one else can get the seasoning quite right. As we ate what was honestly some of the best food I'd ever tasted, I listened to Tony and Maria talk about their restaurant with a passion that reminded me of why I'd fallen in love with the industry in the first place. They weren't just running a business. They were preserving a tradition, maintaining a gathering place for their community, and creating experiences that people would remember for the rest of their lives. The thing is, Maria said, her expression becoming more serious, we know we're struggling financially. The neighborhood has been changing, younger families moving in who want different things. Our equipment keeps breaking down, and we can't afford to replace it. Some days, I wonder if we're just holding on to something whose time has passed. I felt Alexander's eyes on me, and I realized this was the moment when my perspective might actually matter. Taking a deep breath, I leaned forward slightly. Maria, can I ask you something? What do your newer customers say when they come in here? She looked surprised by the question. Well, they usually comment on how authentic everything feels. They say it reminds them of their grandmother's cooking or of restaurants they visited in Italy. They take a lot of pictures of the walls, the photos and decorations. And do they come back? Oh yes, many of them become regulars. Just last week, a young couple told me they had their first date here 2 years ago, and now they come every month to celebrate their anniversary. I exchanged a meaningful look with Alexander before continuing. What if the problem isn't that your restaurant is out of date, but that you're not reaching the people who would most appreciate what you're offering? Tony frowned thoughtfully. What do you mean? I mean, there are thousands of people in this city who are looking for exactly what you have. Authentic food, real family atmosphere, a place with history and heart. But they might not know you exist because you're competing in the wrong market. Alexander picked up my thread seamlessly. Sarah's right. What if, instead of trying to modernize Nonna's kitchen to compete with trendy restaurants, we found ways to celebrate and amplify what makes you unique? For the next hour, we talked about possibilities I'd never imagined when I first walked into that corporate conference room. What if they expanded their catering to serve family-style meals for special events? What if they offered cooking classes where Maria could teach people to make traditional dishes? What if they partnered with local hotels to provide authentic Italian dining experiences for tourists? The key, Alexander explained, would be to preserve everything that makes this place special while giving you the resources and support to reach more people who would value what you're offering. Maria's eyes were bright with excitement. You mean we could keep the family recipes, keep the photos on the walls, keep everything that makes this place ours? Not just keep it, I said, feeling more confident than I had since entering the corporate world. Celebrate it. Make it the central part of your identity, not something you have to apologize for or modernize away. Tony was quiet for several minutes, looking around his restaurant with new eyes. My father always said that food is love made visible. That's what we've been trying to do here for 70 years. If you're telling me we can keep doing that, but with more people able to experience it, that's exactly what we're telling you, Alexander said. But I want to be clear about something, Mr. Rossini. This isn't charity, and it isn't sentiment. This is business. I believe that what you've built here has real value, not despite its authenticity, but because of it. As we prepared to leave, Tony insisted on packing containers of food for us to take home. For your mother, he said to me with a knowing smile. Maria tells me you mentioned she's not been well. This will help her get strong again. Walking back to the car, I felt a sense of satisfaction I'd never experienced before. We weren't just making a business deal, we were finding a way to preserve something precious while helping it thrive. Sarah, Alexander said as we drove back toward Manhattan, I want you to know that what happened in there, that was exactly the kind of thinking that's going to make the difference in this company. Really? I asked, still hardly believing that my instincts had been right. Really? You see possibilities where others see problems. You see value where others see obstacles. He paused at another red light and turned to look at me directly. That's not something you can teach in business school. As the city skyline came back into view, I thought about how much my life had changed in just 1 week. I'd gone from being a struggling waitress to sitting in business meetings, from worrying about my mother's medical bills to helping preserve a family's legacy. But what surprised me most was how natural it felt. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving from day to day. I was contributing something meaningful, using skills I didn't even know I possessed, and discovering that maybe my dreams weren't as impossible as I'd thought. Alexander, I said, as we pulled into the parking garage of the Davidson building, thank you for giving me this chance. Not just the job, but the opportunity to contribute something that matters. He smiled as he turned off the engine. Sarah, I think you're going to discover that this is just the beginning. We have a lot more restaurants to visit, and I have a feeling your perspective is going to change how we approach every single one of them. As we rode the elevator back up to the 42nd floor, I caught my reflection in the polished steel doors. I looked different than I had a week ago, more confident, more purposeful, more like someone who belonged in the world I was now part of. But the biggest change wasn't visible in my appearance. It was in how I saw myself and how I was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, I deserved all the opportunities that were opening up before me. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my own restaurant, watching the evening rush unfold with the kind of controlled chaos that I'd learned to love. Sarah's table wasn't the grand establishment I'd once dreamed of. It was something better. It was intimate, authentic, and filled with the warmth that came from knowing every dish served carried a piece of my heart with it. The space had been Alexander's idea, though he'd presented it in his typically understated way. There's a small location in Queens that's been sitting empty for 3 months, he'd mentioned casually during one of our morning briefings. The rent is reasonable, and it's in a neighborhood that could use exactly the kind of place you've been talking about. I had protested, of course. I was still learning, still growing into my role as his assistant, still figuring out how to navigate the complex world of business that he'd opened up to me. But Alexander had a way of seeing possibilities that others missed, including possibilities within myself that I was only beginning to discover. Sarah, expedite on table 7, called Miguel, my sous chef, who had followed me from Le Bernardin after Alexander's acquisition of the restaurant chain had led to several staff changes. Miguel understood my vision in a way that made every service feel like a collaboration rather than a command structure. I plated the final touches on the braciole that had become our signature dish, a recipe that Maria Rossini had taught me during one of my many visits to Nonna's kitchen, which was now thriving as part of the Davidson Holdings family. The irony wasn't lost on me that the dish I'd once helped preserve was now serving as the foundation for my own culinary identity. "Order up," I called, sliding the plates across the pass to Jenny, our head server, who had the same kind of warm efficiency I'd tried to embody during my own waitressing days. As I watched Jenny navigate the dining room with practiced grace, I caught sight of a familiar figure being seated at table 12. My mother, looking healthier than she had in over a year thanks to the comprehensive treatment program Alexander's company provided, was being helped into her chair by Linda Chen, who had become not just a mentor, but a genuine friend. Mom's remission had been declared complete 3 months ago, and seeing her laugh with Linda over the menu brought tears to my eyes. The same hands that had once trembled from chemotherapy side effects were now steady as she pointed to different dishes, her excitement evident even from across the room. "You know," said a voice behind me, "I never get tired of watching you work." I turned to find Alexander leaning against the kitchen doorframe, having arrived through the back entrance as he often did. In the months we'd worked together, our relationship had evolved from employer-employee to something more complex, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared vision, and an attraction that we'd both been careful not to acknowledge directly. "You're early," I said, checking the clock on the wall. "I thought you weren't coming until after service. I wanted to see the dinner rush. Besides, I have some news that couldn't wait." His expression was serious, but there was excitement in his eyes that made my pulse quicken. "Good news or complicated news?" "Both, as usual." Alexander moved closer, lowering his voice so the kitchen staff couldn't overhear. "I just got off the phone with the James Beard Foundation. Sarah's Table has been nominated for Outstanding New Restaurant." The spatula I'd been holding clattered to the floor. "What? You heard me correctly. 6 months after opening, you've been nominated for one of the most prestigious awards in the culinary world." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process what he'd just told me. The James Beard Award was the kind of recognition I'd only dreamed about during my most ambitious moments. To be nominated so soon after opening felt surreal. "Alexander, how is that even possible?" "It's possible because you've created something special here, Sarah. Something that resonates with people in a way that goes beyond just good food." He picked up the fallen spatula and handed it back to me, his fingers brushing mine in a way that sent electricity up my arm. The nomination committee specifically mentioned the authenticity of the experience, the way you've honored traditional recipes while making them accessible to a new generation. Before I could respond, Miguel called out from the grill, "Sarah, we need you on sauce for the next ticket." I moved back to the line, muscle memory taking over while my mind reeled from Alexander's news. As I stirred the simmering pomodoro sauce that anchored so many of our dishes, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. A year ago, I had been a struggling waitress with dreams that felt impossibly distant. Tonight, I was the chef-owner of a nominated restaurant, working alongside people I respected, serving food that meant something to both me and my customers. The transformation felt so complete that sometimes I had to remind myself it had actually happened. "Behind you, chef," Jenny called as she came through the kitchen doors with empty plates from table 9. "That family asked me to tell you that tonight was their daughter's 18th birthday, and this meal made it perfect. They want to make a reservation for next month when their son graduates from college." These were the moments that made everything worthwhile. Knowing that Sarah's Table was becoming part of people's important memories, the same way Nonna's kitchen had been for generations of Brooklyn families. The evening service wound down around 10 p.m., and I finally had a chance to join my mother and Linda at their table. Mom looked radiant in a way I hadn't seen since before her diagnosis, and she hugged me tightly as I sat down beside her. "Mija, I am so proud of you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Your father would be amazed to see what you've built here. The mention of my father, who had left when things got difficult, no longer carried the sting it once had. I'd learned that family wasn't just about blood. It was about the people who showed up, who supported you through challenges, who celebrated your victories as if they were their own. I couldn't have done any of this without you, Mom. Your strength taught me that I could survive anything, and your dreams gave me permission to chase my own. Alexander had been quietly observing our reunion from across the restaurant, but now he approached with a bottle of champagne and 4 glasses. I hope you don't mind, he said, but I thought this news deserved a proper celebration. As he poured the champagne, I looked around at the restaurant that had become my second home. The walls were decorated with photos of our regular customers, pictures from special events we'd catered, and framed reviews from food critics who had discovered us through word of mouth. Like Nonna's kitchen, Sarah's table was becoming a repository of memories, a place where people came not just for food, but for connection. If you've stayed with Sarah's story until this moment, please tell me from which part of the world you've been following her incredible transformation. Your support means everything to creators like me. I want to propose a toast, Alexander said, raising his glass. To Sarah, who taught me that the most successful businesses are built not on spreadsheets and profit margins, but on passion, authenticity, and the courage to believe in something bigger than yourself. As we clinked glasses, I felt the warmth of achievement mixed with something deeper, gratitude for the unexpected turns that had led me here, and anticipation for whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. There's something else, Alexander said after we'd all taken a sip. Something I've been wanting to discuss with you. My mother and Linda exchanged a knowing look that made me suspicious. What kind of something? A business proposition. I've been watching what you've accomplished here, how you've built something special while maintaining the kind of authentic relationships that can't be manufactured. I want to offer you a partnership. What kind of partnership? I want you to be my partner in expanding this concept. Not franchising Sarah's table, but helping other people like Tony and Maria Rossini create their own authentic neighborhood restaurants. You'd oversee the culinary development, I'd handle the business side, and together we'd build something that preserves what makes these places special while giving them the support they need to thrive. And the offer was everything I could have hoped for and more. It would mean working closely with Alexander on a permanent basis, combining my passion for food with his business acumen to create something that could impact communities across the city. Alexander, I began, then stopped as I noticed something different in his expression. There was vulnerability there that I'd rarely seen, as if my answer mattered to him on more than just a professional level. Before you answer, he said quietly, there's something else I need to tell you. Something personal. My heart began to race. Okay, Sarah, over these past months, working with you has been the most rewarding experience of my professional life. But more than that, you've changed how I see everything. Business, success, what actually matters. He set down his champagne glass and looked directly into my eyes. I've fallen in love with you. The words hung in the air between us, beautiful and terrifying and full of possibility. Around us, the restaurant continued its end-of-service rhythm, but it felt like the entire world had suddenly gone quiet. Alexander, I whispered, hardly daring to believe what I was hearing. I know it complicates things, he continued. I know there are professional considerations and power dynamics we'd have to navigate carefully. But Sarah, I can't imagine building this future without you, not just as a business partner, but as someone I share my life with. I looked at my mother, who was crying happy tears, and at Linda, who was beaming with the satisfaction of someone who had seen this coming long before I had. Then I looked back at Alexander, the man who had defended me when I was at my lowest point, who had seen potential in me when I couldn't see it myself, who had given me not just opportunities, but the confidence to seize them. Yes, I said, the word coming out stronger and more certain than I felt. Yes to the partnership, yes to building something meaningful together, and yes to whatever this is between us. When he kissed me, right there in the middle of my restaurant with my mother and Linda as witnesses, it felt like the completion of a circle that had begun with a dropped tray and a stranger's unexpected kindness. As we broke apart, I realized that this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of our story. Together, we would build something that honored the past while embracing the future, something that proved that the most beautiful transformations often begin with the courage to stand up after you've fallen. The poor waitress who had been fired for dropping a tray was gone. In her place stood a chef, an entrepreneur, a partner, and a woman who had learned that sometimes the most devastating moments in our lives are actually invitations to discover who we're truly meant to become. And in the morning, we would begin building that future together, one authentic meal at a time.